Today we have the honor of sitting down with Dr. Uma Naidoo. Known as Harvard's mood food expert, Dr. Naidoo has been described as the world's first triple threat in the food and medicine space. Not only is she a psychiatrist, but she's also a nutritionist and a professional chef. She's the director of the Nutritional and Lifestyle Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, which is one of the top hospitals in the world. In recent years, her media presence has exploded. She wrote the national bestseller, This Is Your Brain on Food in 2020, and followed that up with a book that tackles anxiety, Calm Your Mind with Food. Across social media platforms, Dr. Naidoo has over 150,000 followers. We've had many episodes on mental health and nutrition, and today we bring those two ideas together as Dr. Naidoo unpacks the cutting-edge science that shows how food contributes to our mental health. In this episode, we talk about the brain-gut connection, the impact that chronic stress has on the body, and whether chemical imbalances are truly the cause of mental health issues. We then dive into treatment options, discussing the effectiveness of pharmaceutical interventions like antidepressants, as opposed to using food to improve your mood. If you're anything like us, you probably find the link between food and mood to be surprising. But ultimately, what you'll discover is that understanding this link will go a long way towards improving both your physical and mental health. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to take a moment to highlight our sponsor, N2 Water. If you've been following us at Mighty Pursuit, you know that we're all about nurturing holistic well-being, mind, body, and spirit. One of the core pillars of physical health is proper nutrition, but in today's world, that can be a challenge. With ultra-processed foods dominating the landscape, achieving optimal nutrition often feels like an uphill battle. That's where N2 Water comes in, a simple yet powerful solution to help you reclaim your health and elevate your wellness routine. N2 Water is a hydration powder that transforms your everyday water into a mineral-rich drink packed with essential nutrients often lacking in modern diets. It contains just 5 high-quality ingredients sourced from nutrient-dense seaweed found off the pristine coastlands of Iceland. At the heart of N2 Water's formula are 2 essential minerals, calcium and magnesium. These nutrients are crucial for maintaining overall health and playing a key role in preventing the chronic diseases that affect so many today. Magnesium supports over 300 biochemical reactions in the body, while calcium is essential for blood clotting, muscle and nerve function, and maintaining a healthy heartbeat. Personally, ensuring I'm hitting my nutrient targets is always a priority. In fact, I recently did a micronutrient panel and discovered I was low in calcium, a deficiency that affects nearly 70% of Americans, according to the CDC. What really sets N2 Water apart, though, is not just its impressive health benefits, but its taste. My go-to favorite is lemonade, but they also offer grapefruit, margarita, and peach lemonade, all of which are equally refreshing. Just mix 1 stick pack into your daily water bottle and enjoy the benefits. We're selective about the brands we choose to partner with, and N2 Water aligns with our mission to bring you products that we trust and stand behind. That's why we're so excited to share this with you. As a listener, you could get 20% off your order by visiting n-2water.com/mightypursuit and using the code EARLYSIPS at checkout. Once again, that's n-2water.com/mightypursuit, and don't forget to use the code EARLYSIPS at checkout. The link is also available in the description below and show notes for easy access. Now let's get back to today's episode. Uma, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm willing to bet kind of for the majority of listeners today, kind of what we're about to discuss is probably one of the more surprising things in terms of science that they've ever heard. So how new is the field that kind of that studies kind of the link between mood and food?
The science is newer because the science of the gut microbiome has really only emerged in the last several decades. Prior to that, we didn't really know much about the gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome and the gut-brain connection are one of the explanations that kind of helps unfold the mood-food connection. So it is newer science, and there's a mounting level of evidence around the research that's been done and is ongoing to help us understand that there is this real connection. But it's a young field. It's a nascent field.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I love how this episode kind of sits squarely at 2 different topics that we talk about frequently, which is mental health and then nutrition. And so we've had kind of many doctors and scientists on here that talk about those things independently.
Right.
But I think that this is really fascinating in terms of how those things work together. And so we've kind of hinted at the brain-gut connection in other episodes, but this is the first time we're going to like fully flesh that out. And I read both of your books, and I thought it was just so fascinating, all the connections. that were made. And so I think a natural starting place for people to really understand this connection is by talking about the vagus nerve, because that's what connects the brain and the gut. And so can you explain what that is and kind of what role that plays in terms of mental health, nutrition, stuff like that?
Sure. So the vagus nerve is really an interesting nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. And in the context of the gut-brain connection, we start off with the formation of the gut and brain embryologically because they originate from the exact same cells in the human embryo, and then divide apart to form the gut and the brain. But they remain anatomically connected, but also physiologically and biochemically by the 10th cranial nerve, which is also called the wandering nerve in the body. And the vagus nerve allows for this two-way transmission, really of almost neurotransmitter signaling between these two organ systems, allowing there to be an interpretation, an ongoing almost conversation and communication between these two organs. So it is actually a fascinating nerve because some of the treatments for depression, for example, include methodologies like vagus nerve stimulation. So it's involved in a lot of different things, but in the context of nutritional, lifestyle, and metabolic psychiatry, I think the importance of the vagus nerve is that in connecting these two organs so directly, it helps us understand how food actually does impact mood and how it does so through the gut-brain connection.
So the vagus nerve actually physically then penetrates into the gut.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
And it's part, yes, and it forms part of the enteric nervous system.
I think one example that you had in your first book that kind of helps people understand how that all works is you gave the example of like taking Tylenol for a headache,
right?
And how the chemicals kind of go back and forth. So can you share that example?
Sure. People associate what we eat with weight, a waistline, all of which is important, but food is also associated with our mood. And to grasp or help people really understand that connection more immediately, I will often ask them, if you have a headache, where's the pain usually? And usually they're wondering why I'm asking such a silly question, but it's my head, I either had the headache here, whatever it is. What do you do? Well, first I try to do a few things, but then if I'm really stressed, I take a headache pill. Well, what do you do with the headache pill? I put it in my mouth and I take some water and I drink some water and I swallow it. And then I sort of break down, well, then what happens? How does the headache go away? Because your head is up here and you're swallowing a pill. And that helps to sort of more quickly explain to people that even though it's not a rushed, fast process, how mood is impacted by food. It's a similar thing because you take a headache pill, it is digested in your gut, it is broken down, and it helps heal that headache. It helps take the pain away. So there's a pathway for that breakdown, and it helps explain it a little bit more easily to grasp the concept because people associate food with very different things and they don't associate it with mood or emotional health.
Yeah. So what I think is fascinating about this is kind of like it works like if you use the language like, upstream and downstream. So it works from the brain down to the gut, obviously, and then up from the gut to the brain. And so it's kind of like this ultimate chicken or egg scenario.
True.
Because and so can you give me a scenario where maybe the origin of your problem might be downstream, in the sense of maybe there's trauma, chronic stress or something like that, and then all of a sudden now you're experiencing gut symptoms.
So think about someone who, is going through a very stressful time, or someone, maybe a person taking a test, an exam, some event at work that's stressful for them. They not sleeping well, they're feeling stressed, they know that they're feeling this way, but sometimes what they might experience are symptoms like nausea, butterflies in their stomach. They may not be able to eat. They may lose their appetite. Or sometimes they are stress eating, so they crave different foods, usually unhealthy ones. As I say, people are not usually craving broccoli. So that could happen. And then when those, it's almost a way to use words to explain those feelings, but it may actually be originating through the emotion of stress, but be experienced in your gut as these feelings, these emotions that don't feel good, make you feel like, how am I going to get through this test? How am I going to survive this event? And so we've often used these expressions, but we haven't, like butterflies in your stomach, but we haven't necessarily thought more deeply about where is this really coming from. And now I think what we know about the evolving science of the gut microbiome is helping us fill in those gaps.
Yeah. And so then an upstream example, like if you take that reverse scenario, maybe something that you're eating, how that would then cause mental symptoms.
Yeah.
Do you have an example there?
I talked about a client in my first book and often speak about this because it's a great example of how someone may experience a life change, but maybe a good thing, and a good life change, but it could have a different impact on their mental well-being. So this young woman who lived right in Boston, had a great job, and got promoted. And all of a sudden, from, eating healthy lunches, doing yoga several times a week, walking her dog every day, and maybe having a glass of wine if she went out with her friends on a weekend, the promotion led to her traveling 5 out of about 7 days of the week. So she was eating meals in airports, eating fast foods, arriving late at important cities where she had these big business meetings, going to networking dinners and drinking wine every single night and more than one glass sometimes, eating rich, unhealthy meals, not necessarily as healthy as she was eating at home. And she had continued to exercise, so she didn't gain weight. But she arrived in my office asking for Zoloft and saying, I asked my primary care doctor to refer me to see you because I really need Zoloft. I've read about it, and I'm severely anxious, and I feel I need something. So I said, medications are fine, but I do want to hear from you. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to talk about what's going on and try to find out. And what we're able to do is trace how really the food, the pattern of her eating had changed, her level of stress had changed, and over time she developed inflammation in her gut because she was eating a very different diet. And it was largely ultra-processed foods or highly sugared foods or snacks or bar snacks if she arrived late at a hotel. There wasn't much to eat. The restaurants were closed. So we had to really reconfigure this positive life change, but how to make that a positive change in terms of a mental well-being by adding steps that she could take to edit, change, help her diet along when she traveled, and stick to her original healthy diet as much as possible. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better for her. And we were able to. She felt encouraged when she heard me offer an explanation for it, and she was willing to give this 2 to 3 months to try to change her diet before we looked at a medication. And as she started to eat more whole foods again and stop at supermarkets and buy, chopped veggies and put things in her, even ask for a small fridge if she didn't have one in her room, so she could keep a few healthy foods and actual foods. It really helped her. And it was a great example of how you can help yourself change that if you spend some time trying to figure out where the problem started and how can you walk yourself back from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, so you talk about vagus nerve and then how that goes down and then up between both in the brain and the gut. And you wrote in your first book, you said, we assume that when a person presents with psychological symptoms, the problem rests solely in the brain. And so then obviously the entire premise of the books is that it might not necessarily be the case. So I think it's an important picture to paint. But ultimately, you mentioned multiple times, you said that the origins don't really matter of like what exactly is happening. And so can you explain to me why that would be?
So do you mean the origin of whether it's the gut or the brain?
Yeah.
Well, I think you pointed out something a few minutes earlier, that it's kind of the chicken and egg story. Mm-hmm. In the end, someone is feeling extremely anxious. Anxiety has increased by 25% since COVID, and they don't know why. So and if you look at this situation from the outside, Does it matter? Well, two things. It always matters to try to understand it for someone, but the mental health, the mental well-being, emotional well-being is not an above-the-neck concept, and I think we really are starting to grasp that in a much better way. And the diagnostic criteria that we have in a text, in a book called the DSM-5 TR, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, in all honesty, really doesn't cover all humans. And because no human forms, just fits into a little checkbox list of what their symptoms are. So if you take a condition like anxiety, and when someone's feeling that poorly and they wake up with, such a knot in their stomach that they're frozen, they can't get out of bed to start their day, or they can't leave their home because they've become so anxious, or they go to work and they're called on to present some data or some information to their boss, they just can't manage it. It's such anxiety that they can't even, they get to work and they're nauseous. They get to work and they can't eat, they can't sleep, and that kind of stuff. So it's a severe condition, but it's also not a list. It's much more than that. At that point, does it really matter where it comes from? But what nutritional and lifestyle psychiatry offers is if, in terms of an assessment, that person has made some habit changes in terms of how they're eating, what they're doing in their lives. Maybe they stopped exercising for a bit. Maybe they stopped taking that mindfulness class or yoga class or doing an exercise that really helped them, and it fell off because life got busy. These are ways to help them unfold that by putting back some of these things that have helped them, can we alleviate some of these symptoms. In some conditions, say take a condition like anxiety, you might need a medication to help the person initially, but not always. Depending on how motivated the individual is and depending on what we can put together in terms of a plan that the person feels they can follow, might be able to use food and lifestyle measures, look at their metabolism, help them understand what they can do to feel better.
That's really good. Yeah, and I think it's important, like you said, it's important to understand what's actually happening and what causes could be. But obviously, you want to check both the boxes of like, maybe I'm in therapy for the mental health stuff, but then you're doing these nutritional interventions that we're going to get into.
Well, I see it as a very sort of holistic and integrated approach. So it's sort of not one or the other. It's everything together.
Yeah.
And when you present it to someone in that way, they can then look at it and say, well, I don't really like yoga, but I'm willing to learn a mindfulness practice and listen to calming music. That might help me. So people can put together what works for them. And it then becomes a little bit more personalized for what they
really
need.
Good. One of the key ideas, I think, getting back to the vagus nerve, gut and brain, is, we're talking about this constant transmission of chemicals that is going on. And so something that people have probably heard, and it's really become like a kind of cultural buzzword. I mean, I've even heard it in casual conversations or even like speaking with my parents when we're talking about like mental health issues. It's like, oh, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And so I think a lot of people have heard that. And so one of the reasons why we're given antidepressants, obviously, and specifically SSRIs, is to, I guess, increase the chemicals or production of the chemicals. And so I think one thing that blew my mind, I think a lot of people's minds, relate to where these chemicals are actually located. And so can you talk to me about discoveries around like serotonin and what we found there?
So, it's interesting because it turns out that a lot of the medications that are used as traditional antidepressants, and they're often as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, also used for anxiety as first-line agents. And they're based on the premise of how we can modulate serotonin. But it turns out that, there's also been research published in the British Medical Journal by a research group out of London that sort of upended the serotonin hypothesis. And I talked about that in my second book, Calm Your Mind with Food, because it may not be all that. And I think that when I see new research and I review it and I try to understand what the researchers are saying, For me, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone who's taking an SSRI should stop taking it. It's not that at all. It's that it's showing us that there's more that science is uncovering, and there may be more to the story. What I think is super important for people to know is that whether it's serotonin, whether it's dopamine, whether it's gabapentin, any of these and more, food actually plays an impact. And there are actual studies that will look at certain foods that you can eat that will help those neurotransmitters along. And I think that that's very cool research because it's a guide. If I'm going to go out and eat fast food today or ultra processed foods or junk foods, what if I added these foods in that modulate, this neurotransmitter or that? And I feel like that's powerful information for people because they might be speaking to a therapist, waiting on an appointment to see a doctor who can prescribe medication, but it gives them the power to make some decisions on their own. Can I switch to, I'm a huge proponent of, can you take one unhealthy food habit and swap it? Just start with one. And then start to build in this repertoire of almost a nutritional psychiatry plan that will help you as you go through the different forms of treatment. So it might be that someone has these comprehensive ways in terms of approaching an imbalance, so-called, but they 3 to 4 months down the line, as has happened in individuals that I've worked with, they can work with their prescriber to slowly wean off medications because they're emotionally healthy enough. Now, it doesn't happen in everyone. Some people will need a lifelong small dose of Zoloft or Prozac, and that's completely fine. But can we modulate the amount that they need? Can we help them with really realizing there are more solutions? Yes, and I think that that's and solutions that are within their control.
So what does it mean so you wrote that 95% of kind of serotonin receptors are located in the gut. What does that actually mean?
What that means is we've always thought that all the serotonin was in the brain, and we've kind of uncovered and understood as the science of the microbiome has unfolded as well, that 90 to 95% of serotonin receptors are in the gut. Doesn't mean that they're not in the brain or elsewhere, but there's so much in the gut. Why is that significant? Well, what else is happening in the gut? Food is being digested. That's the interface of sort of the food that you swallow through your mouth or you chew and then swallow. It's entering your gastrointestinal system and entering the gut. But it's also the same environment where the receptors are kind of hanging out, doing their thing. So it starts to put together this it's almost this orchestration of what's going on, all of these different things. And that's powerful information because I don't think that, I think it helps us understand that all of these things are happening in the same place. And you start to question, well, I wonder if it could then impact my mood. And that's slowly what the research is uncovering. Now we're at a point where in certain conditions, there are even different types of microbial species that are identified, mostly the bacteria that, we then know are associated with certain conditions. So it's really cool as we start to unfold it slowly.
Yeah.
But we never want to overstate it because it's still part of an overall plan of wanting to help people feel better.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I was diagnosed with OCD about 8 years ago. So there have been periods when I've been on an SSRI. And so what I thought was interesting about this discovery is the reason why we take SSRIs doesn't food just naturally do that for you? Increase the serotonin production in the body?
So depending on the food, yes. It can, but then there's some nuances in OCD, for example, since you mentioned that, because there are natural forms of glutamates which may be in healthy foods, which actually can drive symptoms of OCD. And what I did in my first book, This Is Your Brain on Food, is for every condition, I have foods to embrace, so the foods we want to encourage you to eat and the foods to step away from. And sometimes those can be foods that you would otherwise think are healthy. And so I think that that's important. naturally, does serotonin, is your food impacted by, is serotonin impacted by food? It depends on what the food is. And I think that more importantly, if you take a step back from that and realize unhealthy eating drives inflammation, worsens dysbiosis in the gut, and then upsets that balance, that part is linked as well, and that's important.
Yeah, I think it really raised for me after reading your book, like we're kind of quick in just in medicine or psychiatry, whatever, to kind of prescribe things.
Yes.
Like at a rapid rate. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but I don't know, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, there's like 13% of people are on antidepressants, stuff like that. And
I'm guessing it's high, although I don't know the number off the top of my head, but what I will say is the medical system in the United States is set to prescribe.
Yeah.
And the way that the way that medical visits are set up in psychiatry and the way that billing is done through insurance is all geared towards prescribing medications. And it's not a system I agree with because not everyone needs that. And I think it should be on a more individual basis and a deeper level or deeper explanation or understanding of what that person is going through and what are the solutions we can offer, rather than being so fast to now pull out the virtual prescription pad and send out a medication. Because the moment someone is on a medication, we've overlooked the number of lifestyle and other ways that we might have tried to help them too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. We just flew out to LA to interview Dr. Casey Means about some of the stuff she's doing. And she kind of really, I mean, I was familiar with kind of all the influence that was going on from big food and ultra processed food and all that stuff, but I didn't really have a complete picture into what was going on with the medical system and big pharma. And so a lot of the stuff that she and her brother have been talking about kind of relates in many ways to physical illness and the way that we kind of prescribe like pharmaceuticals for physical symptoms. And so I was kind of really intrigued to ask you, like from a psychiatry standpoint, do you think that the influence from big pharma is felt there as well, and that's kind of being pushed as like the first line of defense? Let's just prescribe pills instead of getting to kind of some other things we're going to discuss today. Like, does that problem exist within psychiatry as well?
I feel that it does exist, but I want to also offer an edit to that comment by saying that doesn't mean that if you have been diagnosed with a mental illness or mental health condition that you shouldn't see a doctor and discuss that first. I think that more importantly, the medical system is set up for prescribing. Usually in large hospital centers, a person who is going to see a therapist or a psychiatrist, they see both individuals. But psychiatrists are trained to do therapy, yet the hospital system and the way insurance billing is set up doesn't expect me to see a patient and offer them any form of therapy, yet I've trained in that. They expect me to pull out my prescription pad and give that person a medication. And that same person will talk to someone else, a counselor, to discuss therapy. It's always been, for a very long time, it's been the split treatment. I don't agree with that. I believe it can be comprehensive and great. I've enjoyed working with those colleagues to take care of individuals, but you can see how the person with the prescription pad is placed in that position. Years ago, when I worked at one of my other clinics, before I founded my own clinic, I was cited for not prescribing medications to certain patients and being told by one of the admin staff, that person is not going to be able to come in for very many more visits if you're not prescribing. And I said, why? She doesn't need a medication. I'm still evaluating what I can do to help her feel better without these medications. Well, then she can see a therapist. She doesn't need to see you. And it really was early on in my career, and it was another reason that just swayed me towards the only way to do this in a comprehensive way and to be able to decide if someone needs a medication is to be able to do it in an out-of-the-box way. And so the system is set up that way. It does exist in psychiatry. It is driven by big pharma, but that doesn't mean that does not save the lives of patients. Because in mental health, It's not the same as just physical health. In mental health, if someone's in a crisis, they might kill themselves, they may kill other people, they may kill their children. There are very many ways that psychosis, mania, severe depression, severe anxiety can present, and the impact on the brain. So I want to be very careful when I say that, because it's not that it's not needed, it's that I feel the medical system is really set up in a way that does not serve us.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the essence of what we talked about with Casey Means in terms of that's not like these things aren't needed at all, right?
Right,
and
right.
So we don't need all or nothing thinking, but we need kind of more thoughtful thinking and nuanced thinking. From the psychiatry end, is there financial incentive to write prescriptions? Because she was talking about that from a hospital standpoint, like the more that you do and like RVUs and stuff in the hospitals, the more you do, the more you prescribe, the more surgeries that you do.
Right.
Like obviously that leads a further financial incentive. I don't know if that's the same true for psychiatry.
So depending on the hospital, the outpatient departments certainly expect you to have what they call productivity scales. And productivity scales are based on the volume of patients you see, the number of visits, the number of patients that show up, the amount of billing that gets generated. Definitely includes a line for the medications that you're prescribing, et cetera. So I would say on a superficial level, yes, that is true. And I think that it may not present that way within mental health. And it's not necessarily that, if you prescribe a certain medication that you're going to get a kickback or get something, because that would be illegal. But it's not as direct as that. Mm-hmm. But yes, there are productivity things that doctors need to follow, prescribers need to follow if they are going to continue generating income, which is part of their salary. Yeah. So it's a twisted system.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I mean, this was before I was diagnosed with OCD, but probably maybe 9 years ago, I thought I actually had ADHD. I don't know. So I just went to this healthcare center. I had like literally 10-minute visit with a psychiatrist. I had not seen a psychologist prior.
Okay.
And then I came in, and then within 10 minutes, it was like, have these pills and you have ADHD or something like that. But I don't actually have ADHD. I have OCD. Mm-hmm. And so it was just kind of struck me. I mean, I didn't really think anything of it at the time because like when you are kind of, whether you're a doctor or a patient and you're just in the system, this is how the system works. Okay, take the pill, you feel better. But it wasn't kind of some of the ideas that you talked about, like kind of like getting to the root cause or exploring what other interventions would be even before you start taking these pills. And I think the other thing that kind of has really been talked about a lot lately is, can you kind of speak to the effectiveness of antidepressants, SSRIs? I was on an SSRI Zoloft for 2.5 years. I literally felt no difference between being on it and not being off. And now I've been off it for about, 8 months. And so I didn't feel like it made a significant difference in my life. And so there are some people that say that, like, is there a placebo effect from these things of like, you feel like you're getting help? Have any studies shown that of like, maybe a control group was taking it, or I don't know. So what would your kind of thoughts be in there?
So a few different things. The first point I want to address is that going back to my point about DSM-5-TR as the classification, it's in a 10-minute visit. What can you honestly know about someone?
Yeah.
Yet doctors are expected to do that and prescribe in a very short window, right? So there's problems on both sides there, because it's not fair to the patient, it's not fair to the physician. But then it's the fact that someone with OCD or ADHD or just anxiety can actually have a little bit of each of those syndromes in different ways. And it's for a careful evaluation to tease that apart and figure out, this is really the largest cluster of what you were feeling, and that's what's driving it. And you may have a little bit of problem with focus and attention, but this is the biggest issue we need to solve first. And then you hope that some of the other things may improve as well. But I think that, when we see individuals, for a visit. It's so hard to come up with the right medications, and SSRIs are right there. They seem to be what's touted as treating so many different conditions, and yet they're not always effective. In fact, a study of anxiety showed that SSRI medications really did not improve anxiety in most of the cohort of patients. And I think what was concerning is that a lot of individuals felt no change and were staying on it in the hope that it would work. And it's not a good feeling, because it's not good to continue suffering with those symptoms and feel like, well, I'm taking this pill. Placebo effects, by the way, can be very powerful. So I do believe there's some effect or impact of, I'm getting help, I've been given a pill, and I think that does soothe people up to a certain point.
Which is a belief, right?
And it's a belief. It's the belief that, because placebo studies where essentially someone's literally gotten no medication and someone, not usually medications, but something that, an intervention, let's call it an intervention. And the placebo effect is very powerful because the suggestibility of saying to you, you are going to be getting this medication and ointment, whatever it is huge. But if you take a step back and you're not feeling good, and you're saying this to your prescriber and saying, look, I've been on it all this time and I'm just not noticing a difference. Nothing has really changed. To me, that doesn't mean let's add a second medication. It means let's really look at what's going on here. So I feel it's a bit of a broken system in that way. And I think it's hard to find our way out, other than if someone is not acutely ill and not having those really acute symptoms where they need to be either hospitalized or be in an emergency room and receive emergency treatment for mental health. If there's a space to say, what can we do in terms of our lifestyle? And can we help motivate you to do some of this to see if you improve? I think that there is a little bit of space there to try to help people.
Yeah, I mean, some specifically with OCD, in my case, it was a bit strange to me about taking the SSRI because, I mean, even the specialists in the OCD field, they'll say that we don't know why, why the SSRI even works.
Why it works, yes.
And so
this is true.
If you were to take fasting, let's just talk about fasting for a second. If you take fasting, we now know the processes that actually happen in the body when you fast, right? So with an SSRI, what's happening is you're just taking this pill. We don't really know why it works. Let's just see if the symptoms go away or improve. And so, but then there are serious downsides. And so I think that, I was working with, at the time, we were living in Seattle, a naturopathic doctor, and I do think that the SSRI messed up my microbiome. And so that there's these other things that kind of are side effects, which makes what we're talking about today so exciting as a potential kind of supplementary thing that you're adding in is the food that we're consuming and how that might contribute to a healing process within your mental health. So I've always just found that to be strange, is that we don't, at least for OCD, I don't know if that's the case for other things, but that we don't really know why it works.
Honestly, I think that psychiatry, mental health diagnosis, unlike if you have a chest infection and you go in and you're coughing and the doctor may do an x-ray or, take a sputum sample or try to figure out, say you have a urinary tract infection, take a urine sample and try to figure out, do you need an antibiotic? What do you need? What's going on? We can't go in and just do a brain biopsy to figure out what's going on with you. So there's a lot of stuff in psychiatry and in mental health where we've worked within a system of knowing what we can and creating systems to help diagnose and treat people, and we've gotten so far with it. I also think we're at a point where we need more solutions. And I'm not just saying that because I believe in nutritional and this integrative space. I'm saying that because we need more solutions all over in medicine. And I feel like just, getting someone to take a pill or have a procedure is no longer working. And I think that that's where I'm excited that, nutritional psychiatry, nutritional lifestyle psychiatry, lifestyle medicine are all really emerging as things that people are interested in to really educate clinicians to have a different focus and to think more deeply about what's happening in the room and what they want to offer.
Yeah, that's really good. Getting back to the kind of idea of like chemical imbalance and that word, it's from my understanding with the latest up-to-date scientific literature that is kind of like an incomplete picture of what's going on. And so how much of a role do elevated or low chemical production and all that stuff play in mental health?
I want to say that it's still one of the things that we are paying attention to. But if you wanted to know what is the mechanism behind a certain condition, I'm sure that there are ways we can review the scientific literature and you can find something that explains symptoms of ADHD or OCD for that matter. But I think the study that I referenced in from the British Medical Journal, I think it was in 2022 or early 23. The issue is that it's not all that, and I think that's the biggest message. So it's important to know that the medications that were designed are supposed to manipulate serotonin levels. But is it all that? And that, in my opinion, really helps me understand why some people don't get better. And you might try this antidepressant and switch to another one or increase a dose, and they just simply don't feel better. And it's not only distressing as the provider to see that, because you want to find more solutions. It now helps me understand, well, it's probably not all that. There's probably much more going on that we simply don't know yet. That's why I have to say that I'm excited about the ongoing research around the microbiome and finding solutions through not only food, but how can we manipulate the microbiome and the microbes that, say, help to impact GABA or other, neurochemicals, and how can that help conditions like mood, anxiety, and other things. I feel like there are ways we can get testing of the microbiome, not necessarily in a hospital because these are not covered by insurance, but there are private companies that can do pretty comprehensive microbiome testing now.
That's really good. So you mentioned some of the other things. So what are some of the other either known or suspected causes of mental health issues?
Well, the way that we were always trained to think about mental health is that it's not just what's inside your brain and the rest of your body. It's also your environment. It's also, genetics. It's psychosocial conditions. It's whether you've undergone trauma in your life. So there's so many different things that may have happened to a human being. And that's why still up until this point, I think one of the most important things that I teach residents, especially in our elective that we do, is you still have to have a conversation with the person. Nothing takes away from actually asking the person sitting in front of you, whether it's a virtual visit or in person, about their life. What's caused this, or what do they see as why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And often, simply by asking questions, you uncover so much more than you realize, and you actually start to see the picture fill in. So history taking is hugely important, and it helps you understand the person. It also helps you understand what they might be open to doing and what they may be, who they are, and would they be willing to entertain building an exercise if they're not exercising, because that can alleviate mood symptoms. It can help anxiety. It can do so many things that research is showing. So it offers you a way to provide a very comprehensive prescription. And it's a lifestyle prescription, not just a medication prescription.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, we just had Dr. Frank Anderson, he's a trauma expert at Harvard on. And so, I mean, I think that's a good example. Like if you had something traumatic that happened to you, I would suspect potentially, I mean, it could alter the chemical production. But I mean, like you're dealing with this overarching traumatic background of event that you have to then deal with through multiple layers of therapy and healing that has to go on there. And so taking a pill for that, and even the studies around trauma and stuff, could limit the effectiveness because it's not really getting to like the root problem. So I think that's important to distinguish. So one thing I got from your book, both for physical and mental health, gut bacteria, and so can you and the role that might play in kind of mental health issues, physical health issues. So can you explain to me what gut bacteria are, like a 5-year-old? If I was a 5-year-old.
So the gut microbiome has trillions of little, let's call them bugs. And for us to know, there are about at least 5 different types that exist, not just bacteria, but the most studied in research are the bacteria. So there's trillions of bugs that live there, and they are hanging out, just living their little lives, but they honestly are there to help us, not to harm us. But it also depends on how you treat them. So I like to say to people, if you had a guest come over, would you, and they were going to stay over, would you expect them to sleep on the floor? Would you, get a guest bedroom or couch available for them, maybe give them a pillow and blanket to sleep on? You'd try to take care of them. If not, you're probably not a very hospitable person. But that being said, similarly, think about your gut microbes that way. They're part of your body, and really, as much as they take care of you, because they perform so many different functions you don't even realize, you are there to take care of them. One of the ways you can take care of them, one mechanism, is how you eat. Now, what do? Well, they help with vitamin production, sleep and circadian rhythm, which is your internal body clock, immunity, mental well-being, multiple things, vitamin production, hormones. So they're busy. They're very busy doing all of this. If you're eating the right way, or for most part, I always believe in, if we can do this 80% of the time, try to eat healthier foods, and 20% of the time, you may come across a cupcake or something like that. But for 80% of the time, you really are making an effort to adjust to healthier foods. You're actually taking care of them, because for one thing, when you're eating actual food, real food, whole foods, lots of vegetables, some berries, some nuts, seeds, clean proteins, that might be tofu, maybe steak, whatever your choice is, you are providing real food for them. And from the vegetables and the plant foods, they're getting fiber. Fiber is what nurtures those gut microbes. So those little bugs like to eat fiber. That's what makes them thrive. That's what makes them survive. And that's what makes them produce the great helpful little substances called short-chain fatty acids, which lower inflammation and help that gut environment. But as they're hanging out there and you decide, well, that healthy eating, it's not for me. I'm going to get fast food every day, eat my candy bars in the afternoon, have cookies after dinner, have ice cream several times a week, have lots of highly sugared foods and not drink water, but why not have several sodas every single day, energy drinks, vitamin drinks, but the ones that are pumped up with sugar. That's works for me. I feel good eating and drinking that. But what happens is, when you're choosing that type of dietary pattern, there are also microbes or bugs there that are kind of bad, nasty guys. They're not the healthy ones that want to help you. So they are hanging out. And if you end up feeding them, they become a more powerful army of the helpful, healthy bugs and take over. And when they take over, you get a condition called dysbiosis. You get the formation of inflammation in the gut. And I always say that, an unhappy gut is an unhappy mood, because the moment that the gut is inflamed, out of balance, those little bugs are eating lots of sugar and they're just thriving that way. They're starting to damage the lining of the gut, because they're just like the good products are short-chain fatty acids, the bad products are toxic polysaccharides, and they start to damage the gut lining. You get conditions over time like leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So I like to think of it as these are these trillions of bugs that live here. They live within us. We are there to look after them, and they do the same for us. But the moment that dynamic switches, and that's why I called one of my chapters in my book, The Gut-Brain Romance, because, if you're kind of being nasty to them, they're gonna react in that way too. So it's all about this balance.
So if I'm understanding this right, if we're talking about then going upstream to the brain and our mood, you wrote, so this whole process you just talked about, would that then alter like dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, and so they're all critically important for like the regulation of mood, memory, attention. So if we're feeding the bad bacteria, quote unquote, in our gut and not feeding the good one, does that mean that the neurotransmitter production or those chemicals would then be altered and affect our mood?
They're not only altered. One of the mechanisms by which they get altered is the environment of the gut changes because it's driven towards inflammation. When it's driven towards inflammation, there's an imbalance. That imbalance also means that there's a neurochemical imbalance. So it's almost like everything gets thrown off.
Yeah.
And so that's a good way to think about it. And I think it's a way that people can understand, because there are these buzzwords like antioxidants and anti-inflammatory foods. People don't really know what it means.
Yeah, I have no idea.
So, you know what I mean? They're these big words, and they sound really important, and they're told to eat these foods. But, you know, they'll come into my clinic and say, well, I don't actually know what that means. And, you know, it's helpful when they can make these links. And understand that, you know, these anti-inflammatory foods will fend off the inflammation that's formed in your gut and help you towards balancing back your gut.
Yeah, I think probably the most mind-blowing thing I read in your book was if you transfer the gut bacteria of schizophrenic humans into the guts of lab mice, those mice also start to show symptoms of schizophrenia.
Yes.
And so that just like, I was just, like the role that gut bacteria plays in this entire equation is just, I mean, do you have a suspicion of like how that would be possible or like why that would happen?
You know, I also think that's one of the most fascinating studies that I've seen, because schizophrenia is a major mental illness and it's very specific, and it's you know, severe schizophrenia can be a challenge to treat. But the fact that there was that amount of information contained in the gut microbes of those individuals with actual schizophrenia symptoms, so diagnosed with schizophrenia and had symptoms, to transfer the microbiome into germ-free mice. So these mice had no microbiome. They were lab mice, no microbiome, and the way that we understood it is they placed through FMTs, they placed the transplant into the mice. They actually developed symptoms of schizophrenia. And what I find is I'm not sure how it got coded, how it was contained in the gut microbes. And I think that, I guess, you know, we'll know that as we do more research. But the fact that it was possible was mind-blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another thing that kind of Fuller paints this picture of the brain-gut connection that you talked about frequently is this idea that the comorbid conditions that often arise in this axis, and I'm actually an example of this, and so I told you I have OCD, but I was also diagnosed with IBS like years ago,
Wow.
and more recently have suffered from SIBO for the past like 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so can you speak to like kind of the data behind that of like someone has chronic depression, they have PTSD, they have OCD, whatever mental health condition, but then now they're suffering from now like a GI issue or something in the gut?
There is clinically, I see this a lot, very large overlap of individuals with, say, a certain mental health diagnosis and then having gut issues. There are also a whole slew of individuals who have developed autoimmune conditions, which are on the rise, individuals who later in life are developing gut and SIBO symptoms, problems like, you know, newly diagnosed sort of GI symptoms, which they didn't have earlier on in their life. And I have to tell you, I have thought to myself, well, where does this come from? Like, what's underlying all of this? How does someone who was, you know, eating a healthy diet suddenly starts to realize they cannot tolerate gluten, so they can no longer eat the seeded bread that they used to eat. They can no longer have the seeded crackers, you know. So a healthy version of gluten that they were eating or making, they can no longer eat. How does that happen? And then someone else who in my clinic developed SIBO, and it's, you know, has been a puzzle to try to figure out what's driving what, because when the SIBO is sort of acting up, the mental health symptoms go awry because it's one system in the gut and there are all these things that are interacting. So, the idea is no, let's not now start an anti-anxiety medication. The idea is let's try to fix what's going on with the SIBO. Is there a way to use a natural antibiotic that is not a pharmaceutical? Is there a way to adjust the diet? Is there a way to slowly eliminate certain foods and understand what's driving it? It could be legumes in one person. It could be berries because of the sugar content in someone else. Not unhealthy per se, but driving the SIBO condition. So.
Yeah, I can't help but think also you talked about chronic stress in your books. Obviously, that's a whole thing going on. I mean, not only development of these conditions, but we talked about with Casey means the metabolic dysfunction and metabolism. And so you wrote that recent research indicates that metabolism and anxiety are indeed tightly connected. Metabolic profiles of anxious people are quite different from those of people who aren't anxious. Can you share more about that and explain that underlying process?
So, one of the ways to think about it is that people who have severe anxiety, one of the things we look at is, well, what's going on with their lab work? What's going on with their metabolism, their immunity, inflammation? What's going on with their life that could have adjusted things? And when people are, say, severely anxious or have a chronic level of stress, and perhaps engage in, what we loosely call stress eating, or you're kind of eating foods because you're feeling so stressed. All of these behaviors can upset your metabolism, and one of the ways that they can do that is by continuing to just eat unhealthy foods and going down that pathway, perhaps because you can't really help yourself and the anxiety is really controlling you and you're finding it hard to grapple with it. People can develop over time leptin resistance. So the hunger hormone that tells you you're satiated stops working. And that's when you start to tilt into metabolic dysfunction. And it's one of the things you want to think about, and one of the ways you want to look now. If someone is being prescribed psychiatric medications, there are also metabolic side effects of some of these medications. And I could not understand early on in my career, very early on, when I was starting to ask questions in nutrition, why it was that we were checking labs and making sure that we understood what impact these medications were having. But why were we prescribing these medications, checking the lab work, but not offering an intervention? Like, how would you make sure you don't gain weight? Can you exercise more? Can you adjust your diet? What can you do for lifestyle? We just weren't addressing those things and continuing to prescribe these. It could be a life-saving medication, but at the same time, devastating side effects. So that's sort of a double whammy for people who have a mental health condition, who are being then prescribed certain medications, especially the medications like antipsychotics, have devastating side effects. So it's not that they're not life-saving for some people. They can disrupt someone's metabolism quite severely, and that could be very much harder for that individual to come back from.
Let's just say that like food isn't necessarily a part of this kind of holistic picture that we're painting, in the sense that, let's just say I have a really good diet, or eating organic food, I'm staying away from sugar, kind of more of the hallmarks of the Western diet. So all of that is on point, but yet I'm still experiencing GI symptoms. Is that where like chronic stress would kind of be disrupting the entire system?
It's one of the things, but we don't know that until we find out more. Maybe we do a test of the microbiome. Maybe we see what the predominant species, or what is the makeup of the person's microbiome. Do we look at, is there a treatment for the SIBO that is a natural form of an antibiotic, not a pharmaceutical that can help treat something? So there are many different things to do. I think stress is a big driver of that. I think that stress is definitely something we should look to remediate in that person, or help lower or offer solutions. But I don't think it's the only thing.
Yeah. There were just so many links that I kept seeing in your book, and so One of them was inflammation, and then you also talked about specifically in your most recent book, but you also talked about like the immune system as well. And so you wrote that immune cells particularly like to hang out in the gut. So that's another place 70-80% of your immune cells reside in your gut. And obviously we're seeing this skyrocketing rate of autoimmune disorders. And so can you share a little bit more about that?
You know, I'm trying to understand that in sort of in the world, but we do know that 70% of our immunity is in our gut. We also know that separate to that, our food system is disrupted, and the industrialization of many of our crops, the foods that we eat, the foods that let's just say that most of us eat, is the standard American diet, which is called SAD for a reason, because it's the Western diet, and it's not generally a healthy one. It's loaded with high fructose corn syrup, sugar, refined grains, sodas, ultra processed foods, and junk foods and fast foods. So we know that it's not the best diet. And that in itself is a problem because it's placing people at risk for both metabolic dysfunction, but also then mental health problems. So I think that if you put all of that together and you realize that 70% of the immune system is in the gut, you're also disrupting the immunity of a person. So I feel it's all linked. I don't think there's a linear solution. I don't think there's one solution. But I think it starts with having awareness that these systems are connected, and that one of the things that is a through line through all of it, besides stress, because many people are stressed, we know that, the other through line is nutrition. It's what we're eating that could be positively or negatively helping or harming those symptoms.
No, that's really good. Yeah, and I think that there's always probably a temptation through each generation of scientists to overstate what we know at a given point.
Yeah, of course.
Which makes for really good media. A lot of people want to be like, oh, this is it. And so I think that what you kind of beautifully did with throughout your books was the caveats to the not kind of overstating the science and being like, this is what we know right now. And we're going to continue to learn more, obviously, as time goes on.
We may not be right. You know, we may have to learn more and understand more. And thank you. No, that's the whole, it's not just one diet. It's not just one food. It's not just, I know people love to hear, well, it's just one thing you need to do. I think there are habits you can try to change. And those can be singular habits, but I don't think it's about just one food or one eating pattern, or it's a combination of really what works for you.
So as we get into kind of universal things that might be good for foods in terms of what you can eat, I noticed some key themes throughout each condition in your first book that you were talking about, and then also anxiety, and then there was some universal good things. What I wanted to do was kind of like set expectations for people. Obviously, the thing that people are after is peak mental health and physical health. Those two things that I think everybody wants. But you made a number of distinctions. So you said a better diet can help, but it's only one aspect of treatment. You cannot eat your way out of feeling depressed or anxious. Food is not going to relieve serious forms of depressions or thoughts of suicide or homicide. And so, given everything we just discussed, why would that be the case in terms of not being really able to relieve those more serious things?
Because, for one thing, if someone has such serious symptoms as feeling that they want to kill themselves, kill someone else, or they have lost touch with reality, these are psychiatric emergencies. So, this is the equivalent in the emergency room of a gunshot wound or a trauma or a hypertensive crisis where someone's blood pressure is out of control, so much so they have to go to the emergency room so that they will be treated by a doctor right there and then. So when you understand it in that way, you realize that you can always say to someone with severe depression who is even suicidal, we can prepare you this healthy meal. They may enjoy eating it if they feel they can, but it's not going to have that emergent effect that you want it to. And that is why food is always a solution, but it may not be the first line of treatment in a condition like that, because you have to be aware of not only the seriousness of what mental health is about. Mental health is not what TikTokers are talking about, and it's not what health influencers are talking about. Because unless you've actually studied mental health and you've gone through the training and you've seen thousands of individuals and you've walked and talked to people off a ledge, you really don't know mental health. And I think that that's so important, because then you know that when it's that serious, I can offer you a bowl of berries, but I have to get you to an emergency room. And I'm not trying to undermine the power of food. I'm saying it's an emergency. And while as that person is receiving, say, treatment in the hospital, in the emergency room, under the care of a physician more closely, with medications or whatever it might be, whatever that treatment might be, you can always also adjust their diet. You can speak to their family. You can make sure they're eating healthy foods. You can, make sure that part of their rehabilitation after that hospitalization is eating healthy foods and adjusting their diet, and definitely have them referred to our clinic so that they can get that type of follow-up. But in the moment, you have to be able to know the difference. And I think that being aware of that is super important, and understanding that where the science is at right now is that I can help you, but I can't get you out of that severe state just with food.
That's really good. Yeah, so obviously diet is extremely important for our physical health, but so as people digest this information, what would you say about the part of the equation it plays with mental health, or how they should go into this, with what mindset?
I think the mindset should be that if you know you're not feeling good and you've sought help, right? So say you have an appointment booked for a therapist, you're managing, you're getting to work, whether that's from home or to the office, but you're not feeling good. There are steps that you can take by how you eat, by adding in a simple form of exercise, like a treadmill or taking a walk in your neighborhood. There are simple things you can do by breath work, yoga. You can watch a YouTube video and learn a breath work exercise, which can be very powerful for things like anxiety or panic. You can improve your sleep. You can pay attention to what you're eating and drinking. You can do all of these things while you're waiting for that appointment. I think therapy is a huge part of healing. So having a therapist while you do all of this, I think is helpful. So these are things you can do ongoing on your own. And while you say waiting for an appointment, or you're speaking to a doctor about a medication, maybe you take the medication or you don't, you make that decision with your doctor. But you could still be adjusting what you eat. And there are 3 simple steps I ask everyone to think about. It's, swap something out, add something good that's in, and walk. And the reason walk is really meant to cover walking, exercise, fill in the gap. Maybe it's Zumba for you. But just simple things you can do on your own. And for me, it could be, or for someone else, it could be, what's the food I always crave, and I know it's not healthy. So can I swap that for a healthy version? Can I add in healthy foods, vegetables, berries, beans, nuts, seeds, healthy proteins, healthy fats, easy to do it at any meal? And can I just start walking every single day?
Yeah, and I imagine you see a progressive, maybe not the most immediate effect from that, but like a progressive effect of that over time, which I think is beautiful. And so, yeah, in terms of swapping things out, like I really, through your first book, I really noticed like there was a lot of universal themes or things that seem to be terrible both for your physical health and your mental health. So let's start with sugar. You said in your first book, this popped up in like nearly every single section. And specifically with the depression, you wrote more sugar meant a greater risk of depression. You cited some studies for that. So why would sugar do that?
So it's important to understand that our bodies need sugar, and it's an important nutrient, but it's the quality or type of sugar that we eat and how much we eat. That's the issue. So have quarter cup of berries, a piece of fruit, a piece of extra dark natural chocolate. It's where we get our sugar from versus energy drinks, sports drinks, sodas, candy, cakes, ice cream, stuff that is just laden with sugar.
I'm sorry to interject, but that actually is very surprising to me, the fact that our body needs sugar to an extent. What do you mean by that? I thought sugar had no nutritional value.
So our bodies naturally need sugar. as just part of our metabolic process. It's the amount of sugar. We don't need as much as we consume,
Okay.
and a more natural form. I think the problem is how we consume it. We consume it as table sugar, as candy, as sodas and things like that, which are not healthy forms of sugar. But a little piece of fruit added into your day will give you fiber and other nutrients that are important. So I don't feel that people should never eat sugar. I think it's how they eat it and when they eat it and what form they eat it in. And they should be very mindful of that. So if someone has a habit of eating a bag of candy after lunch every day to get through the afternoon, switching that out or helping them find a better solution is a good idea. Rather than drinking orange juice, can they actually eat an orange or a clementine? Because the fruit will bring them vitamins, fiber, and multiple more nutrients versus the juice that they buy in the store, which has the fiber stripped and added sugar. So there's just an easy way to think about it. So understanding that there's a way we can consume sugar and that we need to cut back on the rest of the stuff that we eat. Why? Because a lot of savory foods in the United States have sugar. Salad dressings, pasta sauces, French fries from fast food chains often have added sugar because research and development has shown that they can manipulate the taste to be so hyper palatable that we want to eat more, then we upsize, then we have the big size, and then the next day you want it again. So it sort of then taps into that craving cycle. Sugar ultimately impacts neurons in the brain, and we want to be careful about it because it upsets our metabolism, it drives insulin resistance, it can lead to type 2 diabetes. It's one of the factors underlying the obesity crisis we're in. The fact that there's so much of sugar in different forms in our food system, and what can we do to be more mindful of that. Now, I also want to say that people need to live their lives, and people, when they're told eat this and not that, they don't ultimately, they can do it for 5 days, and then by the 6th day or the 10th day, all hell breaks loose, and they can't maintain that. So rather than give people a strict set of rules, because it's hard to be human and to do that, what I'd rather say is, hey, if it's your birthday tomorrow and someone gets you cake, have a piece of cake. But also understand that the rest of the day, the rest of this week, you are going to be consuming healthy whole foods, and you're going to be making that effort to do what we've talked about. It's not the one-off candy bar, piece of chocolate, piece of cake that's the problem. It's the fact that we're consistently more than not eating those unhealthy foods. And especially the ultra-processed foods, which are having their moment around what they're driving and worsening, all of these conditions. If we are just mindful of that and we start to scale back on those foods, we will be in a better place metabolically. And that element of our metabolic health will definitely impact our mental health.
Yeah, I think what I had a question about here is so many people can relate to that feeling of overeating, right? So been a hard day, sit down with a bowl of ice cream or cake or chocolate or whatever, something else that makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And so, but you wrote that they don't actually make you feel better. And so, are you referencing? So there's an initial dopamine blast that we receive from consuming the sugar. So immediately it kind of does.
There's immediate short good feeling.
Okay, so then are you referencing when you say it doesn't actually make you better? It's that your baseline, like you have a coming down from that, and then kind of like your baseline mood is like more depressed,
or
after
more
the
anxious.
fact.
Yeah,
and
more anxious. So essentially, you have. Have you ever wondered why they sell donuts and pears? They sell you 2 donuts because you eat one. And you're like, oh, that's delicious, and driving to work or you're commuting, and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I have another. But that's also happening because you're hungry. It's not satiating. It's not really a real food. It's kind of full of sugar and refined carbohydrates. And so you eat it, you have a sugar spike. It's driving insulin resistance. It's not a healthy food. And you feel good. You do feel good in the moment. But, you are usually hungry. Think about it. You are usually hungry not so long after that. And you're thinking, well, I had a cup of coffee and had 2 donuts. Like, what should I eat now? And like I said, most people are not craving broccoli. So when we when we build in healthy foods, we've really got to take a person's lifestyle into account and help them switch, say, one thing at a time. Maybe help them choose a healthier, more satiating breakfast, or a more satiating, more filling and whole foods lunch than maybe what they're eating in, say, chicken nuggets or whatever it might be that's a very processed food. The long-term effects of sugar entering, of the good feeling, but then sugar impacting us is also on a neuronal level, and this has been shown in MRI studies. So we are damaging our future cognitive health by over-consuming sugar, by making that the center of what we eat and what we do. And it's about finding your way to what a healthy version of your diet should be. And if you can build in some healthy habits to what you're doing and scale back on the things that you know are not the best for you, there are ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting with the depression thing. One of the earliest guests we had on here was Dr. Anna Lemke. She's talking about addiction, showed Dopamine Nation. And I think what's interesting about what she was talking about is, so like we're the pain, pleasure balance in our brain. So like if you're baseline depressed, right, and so then you pursue that food and it gives you kind of a high, but then your baseline mood is like more anxious or depressed. And then you start then trying more and more quantity of donuts or something else.
Or whatever it is,
So now you might be adding another psychological component or psychiatric thing in terms of addictive tendencies. Now we're building into the depression. So it's creating an added layer to try to like wean yourself off of like this entire cycle.
What you're saying is fascinating because there are two things, right? One is that cocaine taps into the dopamine reward pathways in the similar way that sugar does, or vice versa. So sugar follows a similar pattern. It goes into the dopamine reward pathway. You want more of it. It's no different from a street drug. The other thing is that stress precipitates habit circuits in the brain. So if you are stressed and you choose that donut, you are going to start to fall into a habit over time. And you're going to start to crave it more and want it more. So there are two things working sort of against us. And it's not that it's everyone has a bad day, everyone has a stressful day. It's what do we do for 5 out of 7 days of the week or 6 out of 7 versus every single day, every single meal? And how do we pick ourselves up, after what might have been, a meal that wasn't that healthy, but, can I get up the next morning and get myself on, do some extra exercise that day, maybe a few extra steps, eat a healthier meal each time, build in other things that can just create some form of protection for, my whatever I might have done.
That's good. Another one that seemed to be universally like kind of a net negative is just the entire Western diet as a whole, which is most of what we eat. Yeah, most of what we eat in America. And so, I mean, you listed that there was depression, PTSD, bipolar, OCD, and so is it kind of the same reason why it influences all these things in a negative way, or is there different mechanisms there are
nuances in each condition. Let's just take depression, for example. You wouldn't have thought that a simple spice like saffron could actually help depression.
Yeah.
And you would not also have known that nitrates in processed, ultra-processed meats worsen depression. So each condition has a little bit of a nuance. There are through lines of common foods that we know are not good for us. But there are also things like the glutamates in foods that are otherwise not unhealthy that could actually worsen certain symptoms in conditions like OCD. You wouldn't necessarily think of stevia as a negative. If someone is using an artificial sweetener, we'd guide them towards a little bit of maybe stevia or erythritol or a tiny bit of monk fruit or something like that. But we're not saying have 8 cups of tea and laden it with that, right? You're just saying you want that sweet. I usually like people to use a touch of honey. because honey has other health benefits, but not much. I literally mean a touch or a tiny bit of something. But there's studies that show that stevia worsens anxiety. So it's all about that condition, what you're experiencing, and how do we really design a nutritional psychiatry plan along with lifestyle factors, paying attention to your metabolism, and to put something together that you can live and do. Most important thing is the implementation, right? So what I found is that when I give people smaller amounts of information that they can easily implement, I'm going to get a call or an email or a message from them saying, wow, my sleep has improved, and I didn't realize that I actually was anxious, because I'm not drinking wine at night. I'm having it on the weekend when I go out for dinner, but I'm not using that glass of red wine to go to sleep. I'm not having that extra cup of coffee in the afternoon. And I didn't realize that I was staring at the ceiling wide awake at night because my heart was racing and I was anxious. So people started to put it in context.
The last one I kind of want to talk about in terms of something universal themes, and might be a negative. Gluten is another one I saw that kept popping up, and that's interesting because you also mentioned the blue zones in your second book. And so obviously if people aren't familiar with blue zones, high populations of those over 100 years old. And so in some places of the world, like Italy, right, gluten is like a staple, right? And so these people are in good physical health, good mental health. And so what have you learned about gluten, and what goes wrong with that it ends up being something that could be negative for mental health or physical health?
So with gluten, for me, it's when I work with individuals, it's much more of what their specific condition is, and should I consider a short-term elimination to see if it'll help them. Why do I say that? Because we have a very different form of gluten in our processed, ultra-processed breads and pastas in the United States than there are in other parts of the world. And that's because of the industrialization of our crops and what's happened there. I will have patients who travel to Europe and can eat bread in Europe, can eat pasta in Italy, and cannot eat those foods in the United States. And it is therefore also goes back to the crops, the quality of the food, the level of processing, the quality of the wheat, how the bread is made compared to how it's done here. So gluten is very nuanced in the sense that you have to understand what that person is eating, where they're eating it, what the symptoms are. Do you need to eliminate it to see if they feel better? So I'm not a person who says never eat bread or never eat pasta. It's about what is it doing to your conditions. In my second book, I spoke a lot about the blue zones, but I also really took the recipes in a different direction as well, not only with spices and flavors, but really trying to provide solutions. Like, if you love pasta, can you use half the amount of pasta, have a healthier version of pasta, and use zucchini noodles with it, or use spaghetti squash noodles, and still have some piece of pasta? Or can you use konjac root noodles, which are pretty low calorie, pretty high fiber, and a pretty decent option if you like that texture and that flavor. So it's about finding real life solutions, because I don't want people to feel deprived. And that's what happens with the eat this, not that mentality. It's like you can never eat pasta, you're going to be pretty unhappy. So let's find a way that you can in a healthier way. And so it's the quality of the wheat, are the types of crops we have here, and how can I guide that person if they live here to better solutions, to still enjoy something, but in a healthier way.
That's good. And so then on the flip side of that, I mean, we talked about some kind of universal things that are net negative. Obviously, people can buy your first book we're going through each individual condition that you had there. But in terms of some universal themes, let's just start with a big one that kind of applies to everybody, really. If someone wants to eat to be less anxious, what would you recommend doing?
So I have a longer acronym in my second book called Calm Your Mind with Food, but a quick outline is if you take the word calm, CALMS, right? We know that anxiety has increased from published research in the Lancet, which is a reputable journal, that anxiety has increased by 25% since COVID. And we know that many people in the world never ever see a mental health clinician. So that just blew my mind. So the fact that, we are so often have so much access that we don't even realize compared to other countries and things, that begs for more solutions. So C is for things like choline, which you can get in legumes or eggs. It's also for vitamin C, and it's also for extra dark natural chocolate. A is for ashwagandha, which I suggest people take in a supplement because it's an Ayurvedic herb which has been used for eons in Eastern medicine, but it actually helps anxiety. But you can get it in other forms. Speak to your doctor about a safe supplement. But the other A is for antioxidants. The antioxidants come from those colorful fruits and vegetables that think bright colors bring biodiversity to your gut, but they also bring you antioxidants. The L is for liquids. And I say this because if you're dehydrated, you can feel anxious. And people wake up dehydrated because your body's sort of fasted overnight. And drinking a glass of water can help that. Dehydration also worsens mood, and research has shown that. So teas, liquids, just drinking water, hydrating, having a sustainable water bottle, these are healthy habits you can build in. Unfortunately, we can't count, sodas as something that's going to help your hydration. So we're talking here about water and teas. The M is for magnesium and more omegas. And so magnesium is actually, many Americans are deficient in magnesium. So that's something you can check with your doctor. Just speak to him or her about a blood test. And there are foods you can eat. You can take a supplement if needed. And more omegas, omega-3s are linked to better brain health. They have anti-inflammatory properties, antioxidant-rich properties. So you can get it from wild-caught salmon and, fatty fish. You can get a plant-based form from hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, etc. So just, keep those foods at the top of your list. What I also created in Calm Your Mind with food was an anti-anxiety shopping list. And I don't expect people to go to the supermarket and buy all of that. They can just take one day or one recipe or 1 week at a time and work their way through the protocol. But I'll tell you that people who write to me or have written reviews and things like that, when they follow the protocol, they can actually get into it. It's written in a simple way. So you get your shopping done, you follow the recipes in the protocol, you try those out, and you follow that for a certain number of weeks, and you really do start to feel less anxious. So it's a real life solution if you're willing to put in the time.
Yeah. I thought it was so incredible. Like, you have the second book with anxiety, and then the first book, like each individual condition.
Right.
You literally broke out each individual condition, and so. And you even wrote it that way in the beginning. You're like, you might not need to read every single chapter, but like whatever you're dealing with, you're kind of customizing with that, which I think is incredible. I think one question for people is, let's just someone hates cooking, that person. Like, what would you recommend for that person?
So I'm not saying everyone has to cook. I think that it's challenging because not everyone likes to cook. But here's the thing. Can you put together a salad? Can you buy canned legumes, which doesn't involve a stove or cooking. It's just, it can be prepared outside of a microwave or cooking, or you can use a microwave for something like a scrambled egg. Can you at least do that? Can you go to the supermarket and buy partly ready-made foods? Can you buy a rotisserie chicken from the supermarket and use that as your source of protein for a few days? Because often you can ask at the supermarket. Most times they usually just cooked in their own skin, and most better supermarkets don't add any unhealthy fats to it. It's a pretty decent choice, and you don't have to do it. You can buy the pieces or buy the chicken and use that for different meals during the week. Can you put together salad? Is that something you can try? And then, get that rotisserie chicken, or maybe buy the protein from a salad place or a place that makes that as a side. In other words, what can you do that takes you outside of, can I go to a fast food restaurant or restaurant? And not because you can't eat at a restaurant. If you go to the restaurant, just try to navigate your way through the healthier options on the menu. You don't have to cook everything. I just want you to have awareness of things you can you buy frozen broccoli and steam that? That takes 2 minutes in the microwave. You don't have to clean the cauliflower and clean the broccoli. So I want people to think, what's my level? Like, what can I do? And I understand this because I began cooking later in life.
Yeah.
And so you know, if you can try some of those solutions, canned beans, like canned black beans, chickpeas, canned tuna, oysters, mussels, great sources of omega-3s. Frozen vegetables are flash frozen in the United States at their peak. So frozen cauliflower, frozen broccoli, frozen green beans, all of these are choices that you can create for your family or yourself, and all they need is a couple of minutes in the microwave to steam, and you can sprinkle on a squeeze of lemon, literally, and a pinch of salt, and you can eat that. So there are ways that you don't have
easy,
to you don't have to have a frying pan and a fancy knife and all of that. You can make it work. But what do you feel comfortable with doing?
Yeah.
And other thing is if you have access, meal delivery services that send you the kit and they do the shopping for you and they and you make the food.
Closing the loop from some of the stuff we were talking about in the beginning, like, have you seen stories, like, as a psychiatrist, of people being cured of some of these conditions, or at least becoming like asymptomatic? Like, for example, we talked about the gut bacteria thing with the schizophrenia. Are there instances where you've seen people follow specific protocols and then their symptoms completely went away? And I ask this because the conventional thinking in mental health around these conditions is that they're incurable, especially for OCD. And so I just wanted to see, from your work, from your patients and your research in this field, what you've seen on that front.
The most serious conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, what I've seen is a reduction of symptoms, improvement of side effects from those medications that cause weight gain, because if you can teach someone to eat healthier and to exercise, they can fend off some of the weight gain. They can be aware of it. They can have different forms of checkups with their doctors so that they're on target with it. In conditions like depression, anxiety, ADHD, and the rest that I talked about in my first book, This Is Your Brain on Food, I've seen a different level. Let me start off with the negatives. The people who don't do well are the individuals who often may have orthorexia. So they may have some healthy eating habits, but they're very fixated on a certain way of doing things, and they can't change that to be able to learn a new habit, follow a new protocol, even if we do it in a stepwise way. And then they may not be a good fit because even though the Naidoo, which is the National Eating Disorders Association, doesn't recognize orthorexia yet as a formal eating disorder, it's definitely disordered eating. So let's start there. So sometimes, we don't always have success. The person may not be able to kind of follow what we'd like them to do, and they have fixed beliefs about how they'd like to eat. But for the most part, I have seen, I'll tell you one of my proudest moments was someone I treated who came in for severe anxiety. She had done, and she was also severely diabetic. And when she would sit with me in the office, this was before COVID, her monitor would go off constantly. It used to be an afternoon appointment because she'd come after work. And she'd, lunge into a bag and get an orange juice or candy bar. And I'm like, the person is diabetic. Like, how does that make sense? I would think that to myself, like, how does this make sense? But she was afraid of her low blood sugar, because in diabetes, low blood sugar is much more dangerous, believe it or not, than high blood sugar. So she came to me. We had several visits, of course, and, with anxiety. As we probed deeper and we explored more, we understood that she also had a trauma history. So she had trauma and anxiety. And she did not want to take a medication. She was willing to start practicing mindfulness because she'd done a program in the past, but had kind of fallen off the wagon, wasn't using it. She was willing to adjust her eating habits. She was willing to work with me in a protocol. We redesigned how she ate. We created different snacks that she took to work. We got rid of the orange juice and the candy that she would use when her, her alarm went off because her blood sugar was low. She would pack lunch for work every day. She started to order her vegetables from a instead of going to the supermarket, she didn't have enough time. She would get her vegetables ordered in a box. So she'd get that delivered, and then she would be able to meal prep for the week. So we taught her to meal prep once or twice a week, depending on her schedule, pack lunches for work, move away from snacks in the cafeteria, which were just not helpful for someone with diabetes. And not only did her endocrinologist write to me within the hospital, we were in the same hospital system, to tell me that for the first time in her life, he was able to reduce her insulin.
Wow.
So he was able to take her to a much lower level of insulin. And she wrote to me when she saw that my second book was coming out to say that, she just wanted me to know that she was doing well. And she was still following the same plan we'd put into place. She changed out the foods. And she said to me, when I go on vacation, I go a little bit off track, Dr. Naidoo, but, I know what I need to do and I come back. And she's doing well. She's thriving. And so, I feel like you wouldn't think, well, with someone with anxiety and diabetes that you'd be able to figure something out. But it's all of these systems are linked. And if someone is willing to do the work with you, you can have and see the good results that happen. And I think that, with conditions like OCD, I see a reduction in symptoms. When I've worked with people an example is a woman who didn't realize that the granola she was eating, which was told was a healthy granola because of the way it was labeled, was laden with sugar, because I taught her to read the food label and then taught her a recipe for homemade granola. She liked the crunch, but when we put whole ingredients in, reduced the amount of sugar dramatically, added in spices to make it more flavorful, so she didn't need all the honey and sugar. Still had that crunch, switched out her yogurt to plain yogurt. She saw a reduction in symptoms and also taught her the unhealthy, the types of glutamates that she needed to stay away from, all of which are, in that chapter. She saw a significant reduction in symptoms. So for her, it never went away, but she felt like she unlike the OCD controlling her, which she had felt when she came to see me, she was able to control it. And I think that was a very powerful switch for her.
That's really good. I think that's a good way to close. Obviously, there's, we covered a lot of ground today, and there's a ton of things that people can do. Obviously, we'll link out in the kind of show notes in the description, your books, because I think there's just so much more to dive into with those books. But I think, with those examples and what we talked about today, I think there are a ton of things that we could do for our physical health and our mental health.
Right.
And that if we actually follow to some of these protocols, like it should increase your symptoms. Obviously, some cases are more difficult than others. But yeah, I just find this area of research to be fascinating. And so I just feel so privileged to sit here and talk with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions and for your interest and sharing, what you've been through. Because I think the more we do that, the more we can help people.
Yeah.
And, if people like kind of what I'm talking about and doing, I'd love for them to check out my website and sign up for my newsletter.
Absolutely.
I talk about a new food each week and share recipe and cool stuff.
Yeah.
But it's all around this topic and the work.
Yeah, we'll link out the website too. So thank you so much.
Thanks.